How's it going, everybody? So today I wanted to talk about Hiroji Kubota. Now, I'll be very honest with you, I was not familiar at all with his work. I recently stumbled upon it at a bookstore and I thought it was super interesting. And so I picked up this book, which is, Hiroji Kubota, photographer. This one is done by Aperture Publishing, which they also do a lot of the Stephen Shore books as well. So if you guys like the Stephen Shore books, you guys are definitely going to like the quality of this book as well. But yeah, it's one big book, and it's really cool because not only does it go very in-depthly with his life, but it also has an interview written into here throughout the photo book. So you guys can actually basically hear what he's saying, listen to him directly and his words and his views on photography. So definitely check this out. Now, if you guys are new to this channel, welcome. My name is Steven. Here we go over classic photographers, give a brief history about their life, and we also go and see what kind of things they did that we can apply today. If you guys haven't already, definitely hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. So there's quite a lot that we can go over about Hiroji's life. I hope I'm saying his name right, by the way. If anybody knows a different pronunciation, please let me know in the comments. But either way, he has photographed so many amazing things in the world. He was born in Japan, but he's actually covered the civil rights movement here in the United States, from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech to the Black Panthers. He's also traveled all around China, Japan, and even North Korea and other countries. So he's had an extensive life and history with photography. And we're going to go over a brief part of his history. However, I do encourage you guys to either pick up this book and read it over, or definitely look more into him because it's so amazing and just so great and in depth. So Hiroji was born in Tokyo in 1939. That is before the end of World War II. And this is important because as a child in this book, he is talking about how he remembers the bombings in around Tokyo. So he comes from a wealthy and affluent family. And growing up, he was going to go to basically the best university in all of Japan, but however, he did not make it in. And so he went to a different university near him. And in this university, he studied political science. And not to mention, he also participated, and quoting from the book, in anti-government demonstrations. In other words, protests of different types. And so it's kind of interesting that even though he was learning political science, he was kind of going against the government at the same time. But it's a lot of different things happening post-World War II era, right? Now, it was during one of these demonstrations in 1960, he decided to take his father's camera to document the event just for himself. And this was actually kind of the gateway into him actually doing photography. And as his graduation thesis, he also wanted to, and I'm quoting here once again, he wanted to do research about awareness of the nature of the Japanese Constitution in remote places of Japan. And so this kind of helped him push more and deeper into photography. However, I would say that the key moment in his life was actually meeting a couple of photographers from Magnum, being their tour guide and translator while they were in Japan. And these people were Elliot Erwitt, Rene Burry, and Bert Glynn. And these photographers really opened up his eyes. So I just want to go back just a second because I did skip over what I think is a very important part to mention. So for his graduation thesis, he actually did go around all of Japan and photograph it. And he met a person called Hiroshi Hamaya. Now this person actually connected him to a magazine which actually published Hiroshi's photos. So it's really interesting that, he did this as a graduation thesis and he's already going into magazines. He's having spreads with his photographs and everything like that, which is super interesting. And this did happen before he met the photographers from Magnum. And just so you guys know, Hiroshi Hamaya was not really a mentor. He was just a person with connections, and Hiroji and him kind of hung out and he was treated like a son and everything like that. So it was a really great relationship. It was not really like he was teaching Hiroshi how to take photographs or anything like that, as Hiroshi mentions in the book. Now, to continue with the Magnum photographers visiting Japan, on the last couple of days there, Elliot Erwitt actually gave Hiroshi a book of Henry Cartier-Bresson's The Decisive Moment. And he even states that in this moment is where he really wanted to become a photographer. This was the defining moment that really pushed him to do this. And in 1962, he came to the United States, to New York, in order to basically make his photography career. Now, during his time here in New York, he was actually mentored by Cornel Kappa, who's Robert Kappa's brother, and by Andres Kurtz. I mean, probably saying this name wrong. I apologize ahead of time. Cortez. Andre Cortez. Apologize once again. Now, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. He was living in a Buddhist temple during this time for a little bit before he moved out on his own. He was doing odd jobs. He was cooking for people. And, he had to work. He did not come to the United States and just immediately became a photographer. He actually came here and he had to have this kind of like regular new person lifestyle where he had to really work his way up. It was through a recommendation from a friend at Newsweek that he should go to Atlanta and see this person that he didn't know of named Dr. Martin Luther King. And he actually did go to Atlanta, and this is where he actually witnessed the I Have a Dream speech, which is really interesting, and especially being such an outsider to the United States, that he's coming in and he's going to Atlanta on a whim, and he actually witnessed such an important piece of history. And believe it or not, and they do mention this in the book, because he was Japanese, he was not seen as like black or white during this time of segregation. And so he was actually able to use this. I don't know if he actually used this consciously or not, but people of the different communities did accept him because he was just of neither community during a time of segregation. Now, his first actual job as a photographer actually came through an advertisement on the news, which was actually photographing the Center for Urban Environment for Greater New York. And this was his first real job as a photographer. So later on in life, in 1964, Hiroshi actually moved to Chicago. And this is kind of the point where he actually met the Black Panthers and he started getting more involved in the civil rights movement and photographing the civil rights movement and things like that. Once again, being an outsider, he was accepted by most of the community, to my knowledge. And he really got into the middle of everything, which is really amazing. So he has some very close-up photos with a lot of important people and a lot of important moments during this time. And lastly, in 1970, he officially became a photographer at Magnum Photos, which is such an important and high honor. Now, with the rest of his career, he did photograph a lot of the United States. He also has this thing where he went around the United States in a camper. He also visited North Korea throughout many years, multiple times. He also visited different parts of China and India, and he also went back to his home country, Japan, where now with so much experience over the years, he has come to photograph Japan in very different views. I think he's a very important photographer, and honestly, I'm very surprised that for me, he went under the radar for this long. I don't know how I didn't know about him, and I hope you guys learned more about this photographer now, but let's get into what are a couple things that we can learn from Hiroji. So this first point I want to make is for any photographers going out of their own country. One thing that Hiroji did that not many other photographers did at this time was that he kind of blended into that community. He didn't try to stand out. He accepted the other community's kind of like way of life, and he blended in with their way of life in the most respectful way that he could. That way he can get into these moments and he can observe from his point of view and capture these kind of photographs. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why he was able to do North Korea was because he accepted whatever parameters he had to live in and whatever parameters they gave him, because I know they have very, very strong rules about what you can and cannot do. And some photographers, not all of them, kind of do things their own way. If they know and live life away, they're going to go to a different country. They're going to do things their own way and avoid kind of these regular parts of life that other people experience. And that is the opposite of what Hiroji did. He wanted to become part of another country's lifestyle in order to really understand them, in order to really observe. And I think this is a very important view, especially within the United States. We have a lot of different states that think very different ways. And I'm not saying that we have to believe the same way that they believe, or we don't have to do exactly the same things that we do, but we do have to be respectful of different cultures, kind of accept them. And if we're there to photograph, if we're there to kind of really observe and see their lifestyle of how it really is, we have to be careful, we have to be respectful. And if we need to, I wouldn't say completely become part of their culture, but, accept it and do your best to follow their ways of life in order for them to show you respect as well. And that is one very important thing that Hiroji did throughout all of the different countries that he visited. Another point I really want to make is that we always have to think of a story. We always have to kind of form a story of whatever we're trying to photograph. We have to really think out so many different steps. Now with Hiroji's style, I wouldn't say that he really had to think through so much of the story. He was just at the right time and at the right place. Of course, with my previous point of respecting cultures, that kind of allowed him to be there. And that's something important. Now, what I'm trying to say here is you don't always have to figure out the right angle. You don't always have to figure out the right place, the right time, and this and that. Sometimes you're just there and you have to be, and as Henry Cartier-Bresson is, in the decisive moment. You have to be right there and present in that moment. And you have to photograph whatever's just right in front of you. And sometimes what is right in front of you is the story. And that's a lot of what Hiroji's photos are. You can kind of tell that, you know, he set up, he did his correct techniques, correct composition and things like that, but he kind of just took that photo in that moment, and that is the story in itself. So we don't have to overthink this idea of the story. The story is right in front of you, and sometimes all it takes is just a click of a button after your settings are all set and all the other things that us photographers have to do. But sometimes the story is just right there. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to like force it on yourself. Story is a very important part of the picture, but you know, sometimes it's just not that complicated. Now, one last thing I do want to mention is kind of him being such a risk taker. Now, it doesn't really look like it on the surface, but I do think he had a confidence and he knew the risk that he was taking. Going into North Korea is a very big risk. Going into the civil rights movement, there was a risk during this time period. A lot of these things. And, you know, when he went to go see Dr. Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech, that is one of those things where that was on a whim. He didn't gain anything out of that, I wouldn't say, like monetary wise. He did gain, you know, photos, he did gain experience, he did see some stuff that, you know, a lot of other people were either too scared to be there to see or just didn't want to be there. You know, there's a lot of, you know, different mentalities that they're in this time, but he still took this risks. And even coming to the United States from Japan was a risk in itself. So it's sometimes, you know, when you have a good calculated risk, these are things that we can do. And these is what open up opportunities. This is how we can meet new people. You know, full-time photography is very difficult, but if you have the right connection, sometimes it does help. And he had the connections from the Magnum photographers back then. And when he came to the United States, he had that connection and he continued working on those. And he was known because of his political science background to have connections. Now, I'm not saying that he was pulling strings left and right. No, he was really smart about it. But, you know, he still took those type of risks. And, you know, sometimes if you want to be a traveling photographer, if you want to do certain type of documentary photography and be in the middle of some stuff, you're going to have to take that risk. And it's very important that it's calculated, that you guys know what you're doing. But, you know, a lot of those risks pay off with time. And I think that's something that's really hard for a lot of us, especially myself, to take those kind of risks. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely hit that like button down below. Leave a comment if you guys have any questions about Hiroji or, you know, the book or anything like that. I encourage you guys to look him up. There's a lot more to him than I explained. But, you know, also leave a comment if there's any other photographers you want me to look into. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys on the next one.